We got Elaine Kennelly on here, and she did author a book called Finding Peace After a Suicide Loss. It's a very tough topic, but we know that throughout, and especially as men, and Elaine, we've had a couple of people on talk about these issues because men in general, as far as suicide, it's really gone up in the past few years. But we've also saw throughout COVID, a lot of people are struggling with jobs, mental health. So I think this is the right topic to really talk about. So Elaine Kennelly, thanks so much for authoring the book, and thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Rob. I'm glad to be here.
All right. So first of all, and this is such a tough subject to talk about and write about, what made you want to author this book?
Well, that's a great question because it took me almost 2 decades to heal. And I really didn't want to go back into the pain, but I had to do that in order to write the book. But I got so stuck in my grief and the way I was thinking and my lack of healing. And I thought, there's a lot of people that are in that same mode for a long time. And I really wanted to help others heal. That was the main thrust for my writing the book. I cared deeply that others would be healed after their suicide loss. It's a difficult grieving journey, that it is.
My thing is, in such a tough subject, you talked about it. So can you tell the viewers what the story is about in general as far as the book?
Oh, I'd love to. I'd love to. What I do in the book is it's actually broken down into a 3-part process. The first part of the book is all about affirming the pain. And I talk and I write in a then and now format. So I go back. It's almost like you're reading some of my diary selections. I go back the day I had to choose my son's casket. The burial, all those difficult times, I affirm the pain because I think that's very important. You can't just, go over that or avoid that. You have to honor the family, those who are left after a suicide loss. You have to honor them by honoring the fact that they are in a great deal of pain. The second part of the book is called The Battle. And what I did is I actually went back into my pain to define the 7 battles that I faced. And then the third part of the book is the hope and healing part of the book. And I actually give practical steps to healing because I think that's important too. It starts with very small steps. They're all baby steps, but eventually you grow out of the grief and into healing.
So we see grief when, maybe a spouse dies, maybe a family member dies. So what is the difference as far as the grief that you went through compared to something like a spouse, a family member?
Well, suicide is a terrible loss because it's very complicated. It's the person that you lost, your loved one, chose to leave. That's the real crux of the problem. I remember my dad dying. It was a sudden death. It was a heart attack. One moment he was alive, the next he wasn't. But there was no issue that he chose to leave. He still remained in the family. And that was the difficult part with me as a mother. My son chose to leave the family. And that's a terribly difficult thing to grasp. You're always saying, why? Why did this have to happen? And you're never really going to know. Maybe when we're all in heaven and I'll see Matthew, then I'll say, why did you do it? And then it won't make any difference, will it? But that question of why is extremely important. It's also complicated. There are so many issues. I actually defined 7 battles that I faced. Such problems like rejection, guilt. I felt so terribly guilty. I had to deal with failure. I thought, Rob, that I totally failed as a mother. And I know that isn't true, but I felt that way for a long time. And I had to work all of that grief through. It was very hard on our marriage. I mean, you can imagine that.
Right.
In fact, at the time when Matthew died, we were told that 94% of all the marriages where a child took his own life or her own life, there was 94% of all those marriages failed. And so that was a task. You know, it's easy when one or the other is up or down, you can kind of help each other. But when you're both down and grieving, it was a difficult journey as far as our marriage was concerned. And then we had another son. So it's again, you're trying to parent and you're trying to keep your marriage together. You're trying to grieve. It's just a difficult grief to get through. But I want your listeners to know that I did heal. I do have joy in my life. My marriage lasted. And so I think that's important for them to realize that, yes, the suffering is difficult. The grief journey is long and complicated, but you can make it. You can have joy again in your life.
This is Elaine Kennelly, author of Finding Peace After a Suicide Loss. What are the signs that people listening should look for these, you know, for people that are in that bad mental state of, you know, they could, you know, commit suicide, God forbid?
Well, that is a difficult question, Rob. Our son, we knew that our son suffered from depression. He was already under psychiatric care from age 12.
Oh, okay.
He was a melancholy child, you know, the child who just never felt that he could achieve. He did not feel that he had friends. And it was difficult. The glass was always half empty with Matthew. So we knew that there were mental health concerns, and he was under care for at least 6 years. But at the time, he was also 18. And of course, mental health laws are that if you are 18, then of course he was considered an adult. We were no longer in on any of the situations or conditions with the care team that he was with, his therapists or doctors. We didn't get to know what was happening in therapy. We did not know that he was not taking his medication. He would skip and not go to the doctor. And of course, we didn't know, you know, so it was difficult understanding where Matthew was once he turned 18.
Yeah.
And we were quite a normal family, Rob. I mean, we were just a very normal family. And I just never thought that Matthew would ever do something like that. The one thing that I recall that he said to me that I didn't understand at the time, but of course afterwards I thought about it, because he said, "Mom, I'm never cutting my hair again. I'm never getting another haircut, never." And he did have kind of long hair. Of course, that was the style back then. And he had beautiful curly hair. So I said, you know, okay. I mean, he was 18. If he didn't want to get a haircut, he didn't want to get a haircut. But afterwards, I thought about it, and that bothered me. You know, why didn't I catch that? Why didn't I see that? And that's the blame. And blame is one of the 7 problems that I had. I blamed myself. I blamed my husband. I blamed the doctors. I blamed his teachers. And that's another whole battle that you have to go through. And so I don't know if I could give concrete ideas to your listeners, but here's one thing that I would encourage them to do. If you feel there are any issues, get help.
Yeah.
I mean, we couldn't even deal with Matthew. We needed help for years, and we weren't afraid to get help for him. And sometimes, you know, mental illness does have a stigma to it.
Right.
And so people are, you know, a little leery of admitting that they're going to a doctor to get help. There might be medication that could help. there are ways for them, I think, to deal with mental health. The worst thing would be to ignore it.
Yeah.
You need to understand that illnesses abound. Look at the coronavirus. That was a physical, a bodily issue.
Right.
But sometimes we have mental issues and we need help there too, or medication. So I think it's important to get help.
Now, I agree with you 100%. And I do want to kick around, we keep talking about, and I should say, you keep bringing up these 7 areas of conflict and that battle and how it really took a toll on you. Can you talk about that to the viewers and just go more in depth about that?
I sure could. I don't know if I could rattle the 7 off. I'd have to get my book
no
out
worries.
in the table of contents. One of the real battles I mentioned already was blame, and I blamed myself as the mother. A rejection was very hard for me. I felt that Matthew rejected me, rejected his mother and father, our family, and I really had a long, hard trouble with rejection. And even sometimes it still bothers me a little bit now, once in a while, especially, at the holiday time or those special, family times, that I wish he were here with us. So rejection was difficult for me. Guilt, as a mother, I don't know if you're a dad, but I would think that, you feel a tremendous guilt, that there was something you should have done or you could have done. It's all the shoulds, the coulds, the woulds, the what ifs. What if I only had said this? What if I had not said that? You just kind of, that whole guilt issue was one of the battles that I faced for a long time. Another one, there's really actually a lot of stigma around a suicide. And I felt that with my friends, with our, the groups that we belong to, our church, for example. No one on Sundays would even sit with us in the pew.
Wow.
It was kind of that they didn't know what to say, so they didn't say anything at all. And I would really encourage your listeners that if they have a suicide loss in their neighborhood, at their job, if a coworker lost a loved one to suicide, or someone that you happen to be friends with, just do something. You're never going to have any words that you could say, but you can be there. You could just cry with them, pray with them, bring them a meal, call on the phone or text. How are things going today? It would be really a wonderful thing to minister or to reach out to those who are suffering after a suicide loss.
Yeah, sorry, you're getting me emotional. Oh gosh. All right.
One other thing that I do want to mention as far as one of my battles, it was forgiveness. I had to forgive myself.
Right.
I had to forgive my husband. I had to forgive the doctors. I had to forgive Matthew. I had to forgive our friends who were not very generous in their presence after he died. Right. There were all those people. I would assume now Matthew did not take his life by a gun, but I imagine if someone in your audience has lost a loved one who bought a gun, I mean, you'd have to forgive the person who sold him the gun or sold him the dope, or gave him the, oxycodone pills that, all of that. You have to forgive so many people. And that was one of my hardest jobs. I actually, and this is what I recommend, I actually had to make a list and prioritize them. because that helped me deal with one issue or one person at a time. And it took me years. I know it sounds awful. It took me almost 2 decades to heal. And but yet I want people to know that it's possible. You don't have to get stuck in that unforgiveness. And I'll tell you, forgiveness is one of it's your hardest task, but your greatest reward.
Right.
Yeah. And so I would really encourage people to work on forgiveness.
I appreciate you. I know that's hard to explain some of that stuff. I appreciate you talking about that. Do want to get into the healing truth. You know, you do talk about that a lot in the book, and especially in every chapter. Can you tell the viewers about that and why it's important?
Well, first of all, what happens is after a suicide loss is that you believe a lot of lies. You know, I thought I failed as a mother.
Right.
Is that really true? No.
Right.
I believe that I actually felt rejected by Matthew. I felt unloved. I even felt spurned by God, that God had given up on me. And those were all the lies that I believed. And I actually thought, and this is probably the biggest lie that I believed for many years, Rob, is that I'm going to heal all by myself. Thank you very much. God, you were not there when I needed you, and you allowed Matthew to take his life, and I want nothing to do with you. And I was so wrong. That was a huge lie that I believed, because if you only have self, Rob, you really have very little. Yeah. I was not strong enough to heal myself. How could I heal when I was believing so many lies? So in each chapter of this book, I present a truth. I called it the kernel of truth. You know, there is that one truth that you must consider. I'm not saying that everyone will believe all my truths, but in each chapter, I like to present a healing truth that I think it could help toward healing. And it helped me to heal. So I think we sometimes believe lies and we remain, stuck in that groove. What do? We tell ourselves the wrong thing. I failed as a mother. Matthew rejected me. Matthew thought I was a lousy mother. All of those things, the blame that I put upon myself, all of that, it wasn't true. It wasn't true. Matthew, in fact, left us a lovely letter. And he never said one thing about being bad parents. In fact, he said, you were the most wonderful parents I could have had. But I always ended up hurting you. And that was part of his depression, part of his struggle. And it happens. And so I think we need to remind ourselves that the lies are there, but we can't keep telling ourselves those lies over and over again. We've got to start believing truth, or start at least thinking about truth that will heal us. So I that's why I did that in each chapter, because it was something I had to deal with, and I thought maybe this will help other people to deal with it.
Well, so with the last few questions, I do want to get into this. So how did you really overcome this? Because you talked about, when your son passed away, you talk about how you were upset. Obviously, your husband's upset. You're angry at everybody. He's angry at everybody. And that's, what humans are. I mean, you lose somebody you love and you're angry about all these things. So how do you recover from that? Because I honestly, like I said, I've never went through that situation, but it would even scare me because, we talk about anxiety and depression. I mean, I don't know what else could give you extremely high anxiety and depression than having somebody that you loved and you grew up and that he came out of you. He was your son. And just to go through that experience you did to really get over it, and talk about that with the viewers and how you did get through all that.
Well, I mentioned that I was stuck in that bitterness. I was stuck in bitterness and anger. I actually, as I said before, I didn't even like myself.
Right.
I had to ask myself a very important question. Here's the
Right.
question. Elaine, do you want to get well? And just think about that for a minute. You see, I had to answer. I had to say, do you want to stay the way you are, like this miserable, angry, ugly person? Or would you like to get well? And it was amazing because it seems like such a simple question. And then you say, well, of course you want to get well. But I think I didn't want to get well. I wanted to feel bad. I wanted to feel awful. I wanted people to feel sorry for me. I was feeling sorry for myself. Why did this happen to me? And I finally thought, Elaine, do you want to get well? And I decided that I did. I didn't want to be angry and bitter and sad and ugly all the time to the people around me. And so that was the very first thought in the process. Okay, so I want to get well. So what are you going to do to get well? And I'll tell you, one of the tiniest things that I had to start with was smiling. You think I'm a happy person and I'm outgoing and I'm, pleasant and all of that. But when you're always angry and ugly and you're just, feeling so awful, you never smile. You just don't smile. I had a very good friend out in California. And every time I would go to visit her, every time she would come to visit me, I would watch her, and she was always smiling towards strangers. Now I can see smiling at you because you're a friend, smiling to those people that I know,
Right.
But she would smile at strangers, whether it was the bank teller or whether it was the taking your order at McDonald's, or if it was somebody shoveling snow for the city, or no matter what it was, she would be happy enough to smile at them and say something pleasant or open a door for someone. And I thought, I am going to try to do that. And when you're so far embittered, you have to think about smiling. Now I don't think about smiling anymore. I mean, I'm just always smiling. But when you're embittered, when you're angry, you walk around like this with a scowl, and I would be chip on shoulder. I wouldn't look at people in the face. And I started looking at people and smiling, just a nice smile. And they smiled back at me. And I could see that I was cheering them up and they were cheering me up. It was just an absolutely overwhelming thing. I mean, such a little thing, right? Smiling at people. And I thought, okay, I'm going to keep doing this. And I kept doing it and I kept doing it. I actually found myself in a much happier place. Yeah. And then that took me back to church again. My husband and I started going back, not to the same church. We went to a really big church where we could sort of get lost in the crowd. And something really funny happened. We decided to help at the church. We could get involved in some little process or some little group. And we signed up to be greeters at the door. And my husband actually signed us up. Okay, I better tell your viewers that he signed us up. So I didn't really agree, but he said, oh, we can do this, Elaine. All you have to do is stand by the door and say, good morning, good morning, good morning. So, of course, the first Sunday we did that, I was mad because he had signed us up for this and I really didn't want to do it. And so I was looking at him like this. I'm never doing this again in my life. Oh, good morning. So glad you're here. I'm not going to do this again, Tom. You got that? I'm never doing this again. And it became so funny that we started laughing. And actually, that was another great thing. We started doing things for other people. You see, when you are depressed and ugly and embittered, you don't do anything nice for anybody else.
Right.
You're just stuck on your own self. And I'm going to be miserable and I don't care what anybody thinks. But you really become much happier when you give yourself away. When you smile to a stranger, that was giving myself away. It was doing something. It was, saying good morning to a stranger at the door. And it really started changing my whole outlook on life. And at the same time now, remember I said I had to work on that whole list of forgiving people? I started forgiving people. I started with the most difficult one. Well, the most difficult one was myself. And that took me a long time to forgive myself. But I started checking off, okay, I forgive that person. Forgiveness is an interesting word because I didn't always believe that I could forgive someone, but I could let go. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
I could let go of the hurt, the pain, the ugly thing they had said to me, the hurt that they, never talked to me after my son died. And I was able to just let it go. And pretty soon it didn't bother me anymore. And so I could think about that person and the hurt that they had caused, but it didn't bother me anymore. And I would say, well, maybe they have some problems of their own. And I forgive them. And I just went on and tried to go through all of these hurts that I had put upon myself. And so the forgiveness, along with the smiling, along with the giving myself away, doing things for other people, was one of the greatest things that healed me. It was a difficult thing to do. You feel uncomfortable at first, but pretty soon when you give yourself away, you get back so much more because you feel good about what you did. You brought another person some joy. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It can be baking cookies and giving them to someone, or buying a bunch of flowers at the grocery store and taking them over to someone's house, or just sending a note, a card, a greeting card and writing.
Right.
That means something to people. And it really helped me heal. That whole giving myself away, serving others, giving away to others was a huge part of my healing. And I think too that Tom and I had decided, in fact, I walked out and said, I'm not going to stay in this marriage. I just don't want to, I can't do it anymore. And I walked out of the house and I drove around for hours and hours and hours. And here's another thing that really helped me to heal. If we broke up our little family, that would have been such a tragedy because I would truly then be by myself. I would have broken up our family, and our other son would have lost a family. Yeah. And I just thought, well, then I've really given in. And, I've lost the whole war. I had lost some battles, but I was going to win the war. And I came home from that drive. And I said to Tom, we made a commitment when we were married, and I'm going to honor that commitment because I don't want to lose our little family. And that was a commitment that I reinforced, and by the way I lived. And that really changed the dynamics in our family too. A lot of healing went on between Tom and me. Just the fact that we were going to stick together. We were going to, because I thought to myself, if I walk out now, I will have lost the only person who would really understand my whole
life,
travel, and my whole traveling journey, this grief journey. Who would ever understand that except Tom? So it was a wonderful thing to realize that commitment was enough to keep our marriage together. So I think all of those little steps, I have no great knowledge that I can share with anybody, but it started with, Elaine, do you want to get well? And I had to be honest. And then it just developed with sharing smiles, with doing nice things for other people and working that our marriage was going to make it and stay committed to that. And it was all those small steps, no matter what you do, whether you start a podcast, what do? You start with one, the first one, right?
Yeah.
It goes in increments. And so it is with any journey, even a grief journey. It starts with little baby steps. And then you just keep going, and it just grows. And the healing, because of the forgiveness, because of the joy and giving myself away and doing nicer things for other people than always dwelling on my own problems, all of that helped to lead me down that path to joy. And I'm thrilled to be in this place of healing. And I'm thrilled to help others heal. They need to hear that things can get better.
Right.
So that's why I wrote the book, to help others heal. And I'm glad that I did. And I'm glad that all the words came to be. I'm just glad that somebody wanted to publish it. That was another wonderful thing. Morgan James Publishing out of New York. It's going to be sent worldwide to all English speaking countries all over the world. So I'm thrilled about that.
Elaine Kennelly, and then she is, again, the author of Finding Peace After a Suicide Loss. Again, Elaine Kennelly, Finding Peace After a Suicide Loss. You can get it on the web at Amazon. And does Barnes and Nobles have it too, or?
Oh, it's all over the world, yes. And they can get it and I have a wonderful website with a blog every week. And the website is my name, but it's hard to spell my name. So I have a suicidehealing.com, www.suicidehealing.com. I think they'll like the website too. And the book is for sale on the website too.
Right. www.suicidehealing.com. Everybody, if you're listening, go ahead, Elaine.
Yes, that's it. You're right. You got it right. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good. You're good. So, Elaine Kennelly, as we end the interview, I want to get with the last question. So with the last question, can you give the readers 3 words about the healing process as far as a reminder?
The 3 words are resist, resolve, and rejoice. Mm-hmm. And I know sometimes that's hard to think, when you're on a grief journey. But the biggest thing to resist is the negativity and those terrible thoughts that we just talked about that you tell yourself over and over again. Resist and resolve. You have to make a resolve. Yes, I want to get well. Yes, I want to start smiling again. Yes, I want to heal. I think we have to make an intentional, even if, so much as writing it down. Yes, right. I want to. And then what do you want? Because you're going to start thinking in a more positive way. And then the third thing is, and I love to tell people, you're going to have joy again in your life. You are. You're going to heal. You're going to get over this terrible, sad time. You'll never forget your loved one, but you're going to have joy and happiness once again. You will heal. And that's important for us to tell ourselves that. So those are the 3 things that I end the book with.
Everybody, again, that's listening, Elaine Kennelly, again, suicidehealing.com. Definitely check out the book. It's wherever books are sold, obviously.
Well, thank you so much. It was a joy to be here. I really mean that. I've been doing a lot of interviews, but this one has been one of the best. And you are a great interviewer because you're just so caring and honest yourself. Yeah. And so I really appreciate you inviting me to be on the podcast with you. And anytime that you need someone, here I am.
Well, I appreciate that, Elaine.